Good morning and welcome to the new episode of Dr. Lamba's Awakening Call. We have been priding ourselves on a globalized economy, and this globalized economy in fact started after the Second World War and was US led. But now it's shifting into something more familiar to the history. I know in the beginning globalization was only the American oriented one, and then other countries came up and had a piece of the cake. But this pandemic, followed by the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and consequence, inflation, changing economy is heralding a big change. And I think it's the beginning of the era of deglobalization. Is going to start today, maybe tomorrow. If you recollect, and most of us have forgotten, especially the younger generations, and there are no memories of the Cold War, which is good. Life should be lived without the existential dread of the mushroom cloud, the nuclear war. And since the end of the Cold War, policymakers around the world promoted globalized economy. World Economic Forum came everything. And it was thought that economy was, the globalized economy, was a force of peace. If the great powers are locked together by trade and the financial time, the thinking was they will unlikely go to war with each other. But it has proved to be otherwise. The war in Ukraine and the fear of China in the Indo-Pacific has sparked a corporate aversion, and this has been seen the way the exodus of the corporates from Russia has taken place. And the Western executives, the business owners, are rethinking how do they do business with China. I mean, during the time of rising geopolitical tensions. And when there is a withdrawal from one country for any reason, that is show the end of the globalization. There is possibility that the world would be separating into economic blocks, and that's not globalized economy. And what would happen is the countries would gravitate to ideological corners with distinct markets and pools of labor, and that happened in the 20th century. For many of us in the West, the Cold War period was in fact much better than any time the human beings enjoyed. We experienced economic growth, access to high quality health care, education, jet-powered trade and travel. And peace, even if predicted on mutually assured destruction in the post-Cold War wars, when roughly half of that today's population was growing up, things turned positively fantastic. Economies boomed, trade barriers fell, and the Chinese manufacturing hit its stride. And then there was internet and on-demand everything. Then peace, even if marked by the occasional terrorist attack, and the odd wars in Afghanistan and Middle East, the fear of economic nuclear war was not there. Russia's attack on Ukraine marks the end of all that, and now we are entering a new normal. In fact, it's not a new normal, it's a shift back toward the old normal. And that is what is digging the grave of globalization. What we think of as normal is actually the most distorted movement in the history. The end of the world is just about the beginning. That was the book written by Peter Zion, a geopolitist. And his central premise is that the globalized world is now ending, was in fact based on corruption. And that was an interesting read what I read, and I think you would agree with that. It was laid on bribe after Second World War. You have offered access to the only functioning industrialized market in the world, that's USA. They advocated free trade with the only navy still capable of doing so on its own, and they gave security guarantees for key allies in Europe and Asia, Philippines, Japan, Germany, Europe. But this was not free, it was not greater. In return for this opportunity to recover, the other countries had to set aside their historical squabbles and imperial ambitions and support the American strategy. And the priority in that strategy was containing USSR. There had been an earlier era of globalization in the decades leading up to the First World War. Don't forget that. Nobody talks about it. But the one thing that stemmed from the technological advances in shipping and communication, rather than a true embrace of multilateralism. It was this globalization, the second globalization, was not a real multilateralism. It was basically technological advance in communication, in supply chains. Back then, till 1914, the First World War, the trade was dominated by the competing empires. And the impact of globalization and the stakes that are critical to understand a new world order would simply mean a return to the way the business was conducted until the 80s. For example, supply chain management is entering a new era. The relatively benign environment of the last 3 decades, during that period we saw growth, tremendous growth in tradable sector, expansion of far-flung global supply chain, but that era is over. We will still see trade growth. It is difficult for any country or region to be self-sufficient in all the goods and materials consumed in modern economy. But the focus on resilience and sustainability is going to present the present managers with fresh choices and challenges as they orient their global footprints. Now, decisive breaks from the history of at the end of the World War II happened because the only clear victor was USA, and it did not subjugate them, did not enslave them. It used direct aid and economic aid to rebuild them. And it also helped other countries. But with free trade secured, the otherwise marginal economies could develop, selling to and buying from the global marketplace. Without this peculiar order in place, it's hard to imagine a Singapore or even a Saudi Arabia, and definitely not Ukraine, as sustained sovereign actors. It was weird. But then it's persistent after Gorbachev's attempt and success in destroying the USSR was even more strange. And the American bribe became harder to justify. The US eventually ended up with President Trump, who rejected free trade, only openly denounced NATO partners as suckers and rebelled in the old style of the great power politics. The Russian president's attack on Ukraine particularly coincided with a change in the White House, and that has strengthened the US-led alliance. In fact, NATO may actually gain new members. Economic sanctions on Russia have been swift, harsh, and cohesive, though they are even hurting the people who have sanctioned Russia. But with the invasion clearly not going according to the plan, it could be the lifespan of a distorted moment, could be more. There is no ceasefire in Ukraine as such. And even if the settlement is reached today, the world has changed. For one thing, let's not forget, Russia spans 11 time zones and exports all types of vital commodities, but it's no longer part of the international system in the way it was just a few weeks back. sovereign debt default appears imminent. And Putin's behavior and obsession with Ukraine makes him likely to double down than to break down. Just today he said, I'll trash them. So with that attitude of trashing them, what would happen? And that's happening. The oil majors are withdrawn. The aircraft leasing companies have had their planes nationalized and they won't be coming back. And then howsoever unrealistic it may sound, I know it, some people think it's unrealistic, to Western Europe, they cannot sever their energy ties with Russia. They'll keep them unrealistic, but then that is being unrealistic. The dislocation and the cost involved in isolating Russia means it's too soon to declare that the US-led order is completely survived. The war is barely 3 weeks old. We have yet to see whether the unity of the West would be on the extended period. One effect of the post-war globalization was that it reduced the importance of location, which in geopolitical terms is distorted. It's complex. Extended the supply chain make it possible to lay your hand on gasoline or a smartphone or anything else from anywhere. And security guarantees mean that there is no need to worry about the giant power across your border. But that is that. Now locations matter again. Imagine it. Globalization meant locations don't matter. Germany, with its capital about 750 kilometers from Kiev and its reliance on Russia for half of its gas, is in a different place in many ways from neighboring France, whose capital lies 1,300 miles from the war zone and gets only a quarter of the gas from Siberia. Poland, Baltic states, despite being members of EU and NATO, are an entirely different space for both. So the interest of each country differs. The border with Russia is now like a geopolitical event horizon. And that proximity shapes how the countries respond. The response of each country is going to be different, muted, more loudest. So this will increase the potential of divisions. As in already the continental Europe reluctance to follow USA and UK in sanctioning the Russian energy. Most of the sanctions come from USA. Germany has not sanctioned Russia in the way US has. France has not sanctioned, Turkey has not sanctioned. And even assuming that the current crisis revives the US-led order, it won't look like the one we grew up. Washington's commitment has faded. And all the countries of the world are aware of it. Joe Biden is poles apart from Trump. But his recent State of Union address, while calling for the world to stand with Ukraine, also called for protectionism and restoring. He said, there has to be recognition among the America's allies that their physical security depends on Americans, and that comes at a cost. So actually he was echoing what Trump was saying. Germany is the most striking example of a major ally suddenly recognizes that this is well past time. The idea that a 4 trillion economy built on international trade and surrounded by former adversaries would have barely a navy to speak of and a military smaller than Morocco's is ridiculous for Germany. So that explains why when Ukraine under attack, Berlin decided to rearm with gusto, and now it's militarizing, as I've written in many articles. The implication of this shift is really bad for the globalization. You are not sure which part of the structure will collapse and which will hold up. China's reaction is unfolding And then it's very crucial. There's a world of difference between Beijing doubling down on the side of Moscow and accommodating the international order from which it has benefited enormously. So it cannot annoy Russia, it cannot annoy West. So the only way it can be done is decoupling and globalization. There's going to be fragmentation, geopolitical, economic. There's going to be more protectionism. We have seen that in vaccine diplomacy. So the increasing oil prices, lead time for the sofa buyers are not the same, but they are worst potential customers that you can see. And if you look here, the assessment is that the effect from Russian oil and gas exports, which account for 4.5% of the global consumption being cut off, the effects could range from 100% of the world managing with 4.5% less energy. That means 4.5% of the world goes without energy. The first endpoint entails higher prices, which are happening, and that is provided the world still coordinates, but if the world orders to the older normal of the great power orientation, some states would have no oil at all. The industrial order has simply enabled us to increase the calories grown by the factor of 7 since 1945. Look at the planet. Large populations have been an anathema, and that's why migration is there. Now, geography alone would not be able to support them. Population in North America, Africa and Middle East in particular have expanded by a factor of 7 since 1945. Bulk food shipments originate in a continent or more away from now is a commonality. Imagine Ukraine not being able to export wheat is causing a scare among the people. So the net result, the immigration would stop or be reduced, food would become scarce, supply chain would be affected, people would be more protectionist, more homebound, and that is death knell of globalization. The era of globalization is on its last breath when and the time comes, you would see it will be buried fathoms down, unsung, unwept, unhonored. Thank you.